And then if y'all want to, you can put in the chat what year you are at Rice, where you're coming from, just a little intro so we kind of know who's on here.
Sarah, I
Okay.
feel the same. I'm like, my face is right next to Kiese. Like, I kind of feel like we're almost like best friends now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Uh,
Okay, so it seems like people are slowing down in terms of coming in, which is great. So I'm gonna give some short introductions, and then, like I said, there will be time for Q&A at the end. And thank you all to those of you who are, introducing yourselves in the chat. We love to see it, love to see where everyone's from, the great diversity of class years and colleges we have here. I always think it's so cool. So I'm Emily. I work in the alumni office. You probably all received an email from me reminding you to come this evening. But I'm so excited to be able to introduce Kiese and Laura Beth. And so Professor Laymon is from Jackson, Mississippi, Black Southern writer whose award-winning work spans multiple genres and mediums, including essays, memoir, print, and film. He's featured on the New York Times list of 100 best books of the 21st century. His book, Heavy, an American Memoir, is a personal narrative that illuminates national failures in a defiant yet vulnerable way, and that's the book we'll be talking about this evening. And then our moderator, Laura Beth Vietor, is class of 99, lives outside of Greensboro, North Carolina, where she spends her spare time reading a variety of genres. Her Instagram account, LB the Lover of Books, has amassed over 11,000 followers. And on her YouTube, she's had over, I think it was 60,000 hours, or 20,000. Yep. I knew it was one of the two.
hey, 60's goals
20,000.
around here. 60's goals.
Anything over 1,000 blows my mind. Like truly insane to me. Over 20,000 hours viewed on YouTube of her other author talks, which is so cool. She's had the opportunity to virtually interview over 70 authors, ranging from debut writers to best-selling novelists like tonight. So we're so happy that y'all could join us, and I'm gonna turn it over to Laura Beth.
Well, thank y'all so much. Kiese, thank you so much for joining. And all of you Rice alums and friends and family and book clubs. It's such a great day to celebrate. And so this is definitely not a random date that we chose for this book discussion. Today we're here in celebration for the ending of slavery, to celebrate freedom. This is all happened about an hour away from Rice University in Galveston, Texas. But today we're going to turn our attention to the Deep South in Mississippi, where Kiese grew up. I know he's dialing in from New York, but I'm going to go ahead and have you start talking about Black abundance. So this was a phrase that you used, you and your friends. Go ahead and just talk a little bit about it and how it stuck with you and how it still applies.
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Laura Beth, for making space for me. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me
Yeah,
okay?
great.
All right, yeah, thank y'all for making space for me, and thank you for making space for Heavy, the book. Yeah, Black Abundance for us, it's interesting because in the late 80s, the Black excellence wasn't something people were throwing around a lot, but my mother loved to talk about Black excellence, and I really understand the importance of Black people being excellent, especially in Mississippi. But it was as important for me, for my friends, to think about the parts of us that our parents didn't want us to bring to school. And if you read the book, I went to Black schools all the way up until seventh grade and eighth grade, all the way to eighth grade. Eighth grade, I went to a all white Catholic school, and all of our parents were very like, you all are representing the race kind of thing. And I guess we were to a degree, but I just, looking back on it, my friend Lathan came up with that like that word Black abundance, that phrase Black abundance. And when I was making the book, I had to interview all these people, and I was interviewing him actually about that first scene in that section where I had him cutting in my memory, he was cutting an apple. And I was interviewing him. I was like, man, remember when you cut that apple? And then he was like, man, that wasn't an apple. That was a grapefruit. And I was like, what? That was a grapefruit? And in my memory, it was like he was cutting it with like a a plastic butter knife. And he was like, nah, that was a real knife. So I was like, oh man, I got to go back and change that scene. But then he also started talking about Black abundance, and it just fit, especially because so much of what I'm doing in that book, Heavy, is you know, can be read as dark, um, can be read as partially traumatic. I thought it was important for me to have a section, at least, that highlighted like something that also is fundamental, I think, throughout the book, which is Black abundance. So thank you for starting with Black abundance. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So next I want to go ahead and jump into who this memoir is written to. And it's written to you, I would say. And so we're trying to figure out who that is. And I'm pretty sure it's your mother. I think you've talked about
Yeah.
that. Um, so talk about why you chose that. And then also, could that you possibly be anybody else that you were directing it to?
Yeah, that's a great question. The when I initially, like, when I sold a book, I was thinking I was going to talk to my mother and my grandmother about their experiences with food and sexual violence, and I interviewed them like hours and hours, and they were telling some good stories, but they were definitely like fictitious. And I asked my grandma, I was like, "Grandma, why you keep on lying?" And she was like, "Cause you're gonna put it in a book, Keith." And then I was like, "That's true. So that is a good point." And so at that point in the process, I was like, "All right, there are a lot of things in this book that my parents, my grandmother and my mother don't want to talk about." So I was like, let me attempt to explore some of those questions on my own. And, you know, that exploration led to me initially breaking the book into four parts. I was going to write at that time to my imaginary daughter, to an ex-partner, to my mother, and to my granny. So it's going to be broken up into fours. And of all those sections, when I started to really draft the part to my mother, was hardest because my mother was my first teacher. My mother was the person I hid the most from. My mother was my best friend. She was my arch enemy. And so I was like, all right, man, like, I'd written this other book called Long Division. I'd written a book called How to Slowly Cure Seven Others in America. So I don't know if other authors or artists think about this, but I often think about like the books I write preceding the one that I'm writing right now. Kind of gave me like the heft and the weight and the skill to do whatever I'm trying to do. And at that point, I was like, okay, you might not get to write another book. My mother and I were in a bad way, and I was just like, all right, try to write this entire book to her. I'd flirted with like writing using second person and some other essays and stuff. And actually, like, because the book was so emotionally hard to write, like, intellectually and innovatively, like, trying to use the you throughout sort of didn't keep my heart out of the book at all, but it kept reminding me that this isn't just hard work. It's definitely hard work, but it's also an intellectual, like artistic attempt at something. So I just needed something in some way to kind of distract me, ironically, from what I was writing through. That's too long of an answer, but that's the truth. So
No, it's not too long of an answer because this is the whole purpose is to get inside your brain. So
okay.
I love just keep it coming. The other thing I think you talked about is that so many books are not from Black men or from Black people to Black men or Black community, but you definitely had that in your mind. And so that kind of felt like a you to me as well. Like it's really for a community, not just your mom and for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm from Mississippi. I'm a blues baby. Like, misdirection is sort of like, our oxygen. So as much as it is the direct address to my mother, and I don't call that you my mother until the second to last line of the book. It is also an address to the community that raised me, which is a predominantly Southern Black community in Mississippi. And it is a you that is sort of grasping at every human being who might pick up the book. You know what I mean? Like, every human being who might pick up this book has a parent. It doesn't mean that they were parented. It definitely doesn't mean that they were parented well. But if you have a body and you've dealt with like the tyranny of other people's eyes, or like what I call like the tyranny of the mirror, which is often the tyranny of your eyes, like, I think that you is applicable. And there's something that are so specific about the you that are like, rooted in a Black Southern femme tradition. I don't want to lose the specificity of the you, but I also want to kind of grasp at the universalness of the you. So I want it both ways, like most writers. And
Well, you pretty much just proved my next question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. some of this memoir, a lot of this memoir seems so much like a poem. Do
Yeah,
you consider it to be, to have that poetry or to be influenced by poetry into your work?
that's a great question. I mean, I I graduated from Oberlin College, and before I went to Oberlin, if you read the book, I went to Millsaps. I went to Jackson State, where my mother was a teacher, and Jackson State was also where I was conceived and born. Um, and when I transferred to Oberlin, like Millsaps, they didn't even have creative writing. I wrote for the newspaper, and I wrote on the literary magazine and whatnot. But we didn't. There wasn't like a concrete place where you could go to work on fiction or not creative nonfiction or poetry. When I got to Oberlin, there was a creative writing department, but you had to apply to get into it. So I was just like, I don't want to be told I'm not good, so I didn't apply. But I just kept on working and working and working and writing. What I was writing was, essays. I was doing a lot of journalism, but I was also just writing a ton of poetry. I was reading a ton of poets. I mean, from spanning forever, centuries and centuries. And when I got into graduate school at University of Indiana, the poet Yusef Komayaka was really the reason I went there, because I was like in love with Yusef's work. So I'm someone who was like guided primarily by like the tenets of poetry. I would say much more than I am guided by the tenets of fiction and or creative nonfiction. But those poets out there in the world are so good. I would never call myself a poet, but everything I draft, I started as verse. You know what I mean? Like, and so this book, it's like, yeah, it was like a big long poem, and then I have to try to convince people that it's not. You know what I mean? Like, and then I have to kind of try to, and if you actually look at the way what I'm trying to do with repetition, what I'm trying to do with like multiple refrains, and how some lines in that, some paragraphs in that book are actually just lines, and so lines are just I'm really writing stanzas. So I would never tell real poets that that was a poem, but it definitely started as a poem, and I was trying to get poetry through to a readerly public that sometimes kind of doesn't know what to do with poetry. So
Well, I'm going to
thanks,
call you on
thanks
this.
for calling me out on that. I appreciate
I'm gonna keep calling you
it.
out on this, because as you were afraid to apply to that creative writing program, don't be afraid to step into the poetry world either. I mean, I've had conversations with Sophia Sinclair, and she was able to bring her poetry into her memoir, and I
Oh,
think you did it beautifully. And there's some reach there. I love it.
thank you. I mean, that's what I'm saying. But like Sinclair is like one of the greatest. You know what I mean? That's why you can't call yourself a poet, because that's a real poet. So
Well, I'm not going down that lane.
okay.
All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the name, the title of this book, Heavy. It means and stands for a lot. Was it always the title? And if so, when did you come to it, or how did you come to it?
No, the title. I mean, I'm embarrassed about what the title initially was, but
Give it to us.
sometimes you name your sometimes you name your books or your babies. Sometimes you come up with weird. So initially, like when I sold it, it was called 309, um,
Okay.
a fat black memoir, and and the idea was like I was trying to convince people I weighed 309 pounds, and like I said, I was gonna lose at that point. I think I was gonna lose like 100 pounds during the writing of the book, and again, that book was a book about food and sexual violence where I was interviewing. So like the only part of me that you would have gotten was like my weight loss journey. And it was
Right.
called 309, a fat black memoir. But I was kind of doing, it was one of those books where I'm looking like peripherally at these two quote unquote characters who are really carrying the narrative. And the only thing you would have gotten from me was my attempt at losing 100, because I've lost 100 and some pounds before. So thankfully, during the writing of the book, I realized that that title wasn't doing the book any favors. And when you reread and reread and reread and reread, and one of the words that kept coming up in my revision was like heavy. My grandmother, who just passed away, um, she had dementia at the time, but she wasn't deep in her dementia at all. So she would still talk to me, sort of like quote unquote sensibly, and one of the words that she kept using was heavy. So I just thought I would use heavy, and then I throw the American memoir portion of it, just to remind myself and the reader that in addition to like this being a book about this young person's life, this also is a book that is critiquing the memoir canon that came before it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and the book is also accepting that just like as flawed as some of those other memoirs are, as is the writer of this memoir and this memoir. So, it is an American memoir because one, it is created here with all of the paradoxes of Americanness, but it also is an American memoir because some of the things that I ultimately want to critique in Americanness, I critique, but I don't necessarily reckon with. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes there's this American notion to pat ourselves on the back for calling a thing out, as opposed to patting ourselves on the back for actually like sitting and bodily reckoning with the thing we're calling. And I think at times in this book, I'm naming things. I'm trying to say that about education. A lot of this book is about education, about my experience of education. And then I become a professor, I become a teacher, and I fail in a bazillion different ways. So in that way, I'm saying like that is part of the Americanness of it. Like we can point, man, we can point. And then when it comes time to reckon with that thing that we're pointing at in ourselves, a lot of us sort of fall short. So that's part of what makes it American to me.
Well, not long after we get this amazing title, because I am glad that it morphed and moved more into your story, not just your weight loss story, because it is so impactful. But then we get your talk of how important and powerful the first line of a book can be. Oh, you're muted, Kiese. Okay. All right, there you go. I was just going to say it's so important how powerful the first sentence is. You came to that when you read a book, but how did you have that in mind when you went to write your first line?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just again, I want to thank you for talking to me about this project. But yeah, like I wanted a first line that was kind of gonna invite the reader in, but also I wanted a first line. I'm not saying at all that my book deserves to be in the pantheon of great memoirs, but sometimes you have to convince yourself. And
Yeah.
so, like, I read all the great memoirs, and at the time, I was like, I think I was judging the National Book Award for nonfiction. So I was literally in the midst of reading, like, the greatest memoirs that were written the previous year, I think, and I was just like, I want to let people know from the jump, like I'm here. You know what I mean? Like not like in a like conceited way,
No.
but I think if there's part of this writing thing where we have to be willing to put ourselves like toe to toe with people whose names I'm afraid to even say. And for me, that starts with that first line. You know what I
All
mean?
right.
Like, I want that first line to like stand at attention and let people know that they're stepping into something that is substantial.
Well,
Um,
we're ready to jump and stand at attention. So can you read those first two paragraphs for us? I don't know if everybody listened to the audiobook, but you're about to get a piece of him reading this.
oh yeah, I'll read the
You have
first
it?
two paragraphs. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the prologue kind of thing is called Bend. Um, actually, it's called Ben, Ben. And these are the first two graphs. Um, I did not want to write to you. I wanted to write a lie. I did not want to write honestly about black lives, black thighs, black loves, black laughs, black food, black addictions, black stretch marks, black dollars, black words, black abuses, black blues, black belly buttons, black wins, black bins, black consent, black parents, or black children. I did not want to write about us. I wanted to write an American memoir. I wanted to write a lie. I wanted to do that old black work of pandering and lying to folks who pay us to pander and lie to them every day. I wanted to write about our family's relationships to simple carbohydrates, deep fried meats, and high fructose corn syrup. I wanted the book to begin with my weighing 319 pounds and end with my weighing 165 pounds. I wanted to pepper the book with acerbic warnings to us fat black folk in the deep south and saccharine sentimental exhortations from grandmama. I did not want you to laugh. I wanted to write a lie. That's pretty much the first two graphs. So
Uh, I get chill bumps. Like I want to tell you, it did grab me and it was powerful. So and so well written. And that's why I still tend to go I just love that poetic feel, but it's like poetry with a knife through it. So how did you want the reader to grasp this novel? Like,
Um,
we talked about, having a certain audience, but this has obviously seen a huge audience. Did you have goals going into this, or were you just writing it for you and at the time?
yeah, I mean, I was, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. My mother and to my estimation, we kind of stopped loving each other. At least loving each other the ways that I think we used to say we did. And at that point, all I felt like I had was like this gift that my mama gave me, which was the art and act of writing. Um, and I wanted for my mama and I to be able to talk honestly about a lot the things that we hadn't, and because I'm a teacher and I'm a perpetual student, I wanted readers of this book to kind of will themselves, if they were ready, to have like hard conversations with the people they purport to love about love. And I wanted us to contend with what it means to move through the world, like, often um, deceiving the people closest to us. And especially coming from like a Black Southern tradition, which is rooted in like a history of organized, um, direct action. I wanted us to consider what how possible it is for us to actually like quote unquote overcome if we haven't done the work of tending to our insides and the insides of our friendships and our organizations and whatnot. So I wanted to do a lot, but the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted my mama um, and um, me to kind of, I wanted us to love each other again, and I don't think we I think we stopped loving each other. So that's really at the root of it. It's kind of like a plea for two a mother and a child, two lovers, whatever you want to call it, two human beings, to kind of like let's give ourselves a chance at this thing and see what happens.
Well, I would say that you did not have the most regular, common upbringing because of who your mother was and what her expectations of you were. Um, how did you feel having this background in a slew of people that probably aren't writing like you are for therapy, or writing just because you love it? Like, how did that play in your life?
You mean when I was writing it?
Yeah, well, just in general, because I mean, I feel like she had such an influence
Right.
to get you to this point, whether it be good or bad. I mean, she did ask you to write immediately, like from the beginning of your life.
Yeah. I was with my mama last week, and every time, I mean, I'm from Mississippi, so we laugh about things. Sometimes it might not be funny, but sometimes I'm like, damn, mama, don't you wish you didn't teach me to write? Because, it was hard. It was hard. This book was hard for my mother, like I say this often. She didn't love the idea of the book, but she loved the idea of the book much more than like what actually happened because, like art, you put art out in the world, I don't think there's any expectation that people are gonna engage with it. And so I think my mama like thought, my mother saw the book before anybody else. She suggested edits. She suggested just like things she didn't want in the book. She told me things to take out. So she knew what I was gonna put out, but I don't think she knew that a, a significant number of people were gonna read it. You know what I mean? Like I think thinking about, I always think about the size of my city. Like Jackson, when I was growing up, had like 250,000 people, something like that. It's a lot smaller now, but like 300 some thousand people read that book. And so when my mama was talking to me about it and engaging with it, I don't think she thought that many people would read it, and I also don't think she thought that the literary world would take it as seriously as an art object, not like have anything to, what I mean, like it's just a piece of art. And it's weird, like a lot of the things that this book has garnered, what I'm saying, like awards and all that kind of stuff, like my mama loves that shit way more than me. Like I'm in it kind of like I'm on to the, I'm one of those people who's like I'm kind of trying to do the next thing. I'm trying to make this next piece of art like better than heavy. And my mom on the other hand, like it's weird. Like she's sort of, I think she does regret the fact that I wrote this book, and she loves telling all her friends everything. Like she knows all the statistics, about the book. She's always telling me when the book has won some shit that I should have known. So it's just it's complicated. Like I think all relationships are. Do you know what I mean? And so I will say, after I wrote the book, I wasn't ready to be in the classroom because I didn't think about my students reading it, and that's like that's an error. But I didn't think about like my body in the classroom, um, teaching young people who'd read that book, meaning that young people who, for better or worse, think they know me in a way that I would never let them know me just as a teacher. And so that definitely shifted my pedagogy big time. And shifted the way I show up for students too. I mean, we can talk about that if we want to, but so I think those are the biggest things: my relationship with my mom and some friends, and then just the fact that I have to be in front of students. A lot of students don't know anything about their teachers. They don't they don't know they don't know like anything about us, but a lot of students do read up on, so a lot of students come to my classes and they'll be like quoting shit from me from America from that memoir, and I'm like, oh God, oh, okay, well,
Well, now you know.
now you know.
Well,
That's right.
at first I thought, oh my gosh, like if I wrote, like, what would my family think, right? But your mom is a different character in that she constantly would rather you ask the better question than have that mediocre
Right.
thought, right? And
Right.
so for me, I think that also is a different perspective than probably most people writing a memoir. To have a mom like that,
Right.
it's so intriguing. It's such a good
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah. And I mean, and as a fourth grader, my mama, her dissertation, she worked on a dissertation at University of Wisconsin, and it came out as a book, I think in like 1985 or 86 or something like that. I remember, and it was a hardback dissertation. Like I'm 11, 12, I don't know. It was on public policy in Mississippi, legislators' law and public policy in Mississippi between 1960 and something else. And I went to school like showing that to my friends like it was like, I don't know, a new rap tape or something. And my friends were like, what the, it didn't even have, those dissertation books, they don't even have covers. Like they're red with like, and I was just so proud that my mother had a book.
Mhm.
So when I put out my first book, my mom was just critical. My mama was like, "Oh, Key, I see some errors on page 2 and 3 and 4." Put out my second book, she was like, "I don't think you should put that out." And in this book, like she was just like, she had a lot to say about like the art of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are kind of beautiful conversations. I wish that I had recorded the conversations, not when my mama was and I were arguing about like the content of what was in that book, but when she was talking to me about the importance of not writing it like I wrote it. You know what I mean? Which to me is like a motherly thing, but it's also like she's coming from her intellectual academic discipline, and she's trying to enforce that, understandably, on me. And my whole life I've been like, no. So, it's just sort of like replaying the conversation we've been having for like 40 years. So,
And so, do you find that it did bring some of that love back? I mean, your original goal was to find
absolutely.
that love again.
Yeah, I don't know if it brought it back, and that it opened, like I would say, like new chambers of love for us. Like I mean, I grew up in Mississippi, right? Like um, racial violence is sort of like as ubiquitous as like humidity, and so we could talk about racial violence, but we never talked about sexual violence. We rarely talked about sex. We didn't talk about sexual abuse. So there's all these things we didn't talk about that I name and I sit in and I sort of circle and I bring us through, that my mother and I had to talk about. And one of the things we had to talk about was addiction. You know what I mean? Like be a gambling addiction, or body dysmorphia, or addiction to different kinds of things. Like we hadn't had conversations about addiction, though addiction ravished our family like it ravishes a lot of families. Until I wrote that, and I'm not trying to say like the writing it was a panacea. It's not like writing it made everything better, but I will say writing it gave us a chance to move to a better place. And we were in a horrendous place individually for sure, and collectively as a mother and child, we were in a horrendous place, and we're definitely in a better place. Like we just are. I mean, I don't think it's just because of that book. I think it's partially because my mother's um ultimately, even though she was sort of hesitant, like her desire to be a part of the making of the book was as important as the book in the long run. It gave us opportunity for years to sit down and think and talk through these things and disagree and fight, but at least we were fighting on like terms that we both could at least kind of agree upon, even if we didn't agree with like where those terms landed or where they began. It gave us opportunity, and that sort of is the luckiest thing in the world, actually.
Yeah, I mean, opportunity and having the chance to have those conversations are really important and precious. So it's good that you had it, and I hope that it is creating more conversations beyond you and your mom to other families as well, because this affects so many people in so many ways. I want to
Absolutely.
talk to you about your grandma, though. I know you said she passed away, and I'm terribly sad to hear that. I know you gave her a dedication at the beginning, um, but for your grandma, was she how do you describe her? Was she kind of your safe space, like in a lot of ways? I mean, I'm just trying to like grasp. I know she meant so much, but where did she
Um,
sit with you?
yeah, I mean, she was, I mean, she is, um, sh you know, my wish for people is that everybody in the world could be loved like responsibly. And for me, that means loved like my grandmama loved not just me, but my mama, my cousins, like her other children. She was just, at least by the time I was born, she was just so good at love. She was good at love, man. She was, and this is a black woman born in 1929 in Mississippi who refused to move north. She refused to go to the Midwest with the rest of her family because she was, she almost soon as she was born, she was working in those fields. She was like, I'm working in these fields. I'm not leaving to go to Chicago. She's like, this land, as much as we work it, like this land should be ours as much as it should be anybody else's. And um, she just never tried to hurt me. My entire life, my grandmama never hurt me. I mean, when you love people, they hurt you because you let them down, or I let her down, or something. But she
Right.
just, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know the people on this call, but I was a big boy. When you grow up, when you're a big black boy in Mississippi, my mama was worried about what police were gonna do to me, right? From the time I was like 8 or 9, because she was like, they're not gonna see you as a boy, they're gonna see you as a man. So she really would, kind of encourage me or discourage me from eating. Um, and my granny was just like, we go to my grandma's house, everything we eat would come from her garden. She had pigs and stuff. I mean, I don't eat meat now, but back then I kind of had to eat it because my grandmama grew it. But I used to hate to have to eat the fucking pigs and cows and fish and shit that she would kill. But whatever we ate, she made. She made from the dirt or she raised, and she was just like for me it was just a big deal to be able like to finish a plate of food, and my granny would be like, "You want some more?" like not. And my mama, for understandable reasons, would be like, "Key, you know." You don't need to, don't put any more. And really, she was trying to protect me because this idea was like, you're a black boy. I want you to be a black boy. Like the more you eat, the bigger you are, the more you're gonna appear to be manly to people in this culture that kill black men. And my granny was just always like, yeah, true, but I want my baby to eat. And she just taught me so much.
Well, you mentioned like you say I want topics you wanted to discuss with her, and I'll just list a couple like words and memory, emergencies, weight versus weight, sexual violence in your family. But you did actually try to do this at one point, and that you were so confused and you just decided to write something down and give
Mm,
it to your grandmother.
mm,
What made you want to do that? And do you think that that was helpful for you? I guess just describe that night.
mm. Right. I mean that's the hardest part of that book was because even at that point, I just always expected my granny to have not just the right answer, but the answer that was gonna make me feel right, or the answer, not just the good answer, but the answer was gonna make me feel good. And I wrote to her in my Sunday school notebook about some things that had been happening in Jackson because she lived in Forest, and she didn't know what to do with it because it implicated her um, family, her daughter and her grandson in different ways. And part of that book heavy is like I was like, Grandma, I told you about this. Like, part of me. I mean, I'm not saying this. A part of me is just like, I told you. Like, I wrote it to you. Like, why couldn't you help me? But part of the writing in the book is like reckoning like with the fact that like the stuff that I told my granny about. I mean, it was terrifying for her to read that and then have to, shit, she wasn't going to no therapy. Therapy was church. You know what I'm saying? Like, she didn't know what to do with what I gave her, but I expected her to, and and ultimately she did. She was that safeness. She was that responsible love. But in terms of actually talking to me about what I wrote in that, which was about various forms of violence and abuse that I saw and experienced, she just couldn't do, she couldn't confront that head on. Um, and
Yeah, I think there's different generations,
for
and
sure,
she came from a completely different one. Your mom came from a completely different one. And then you and I grew up in that same generation
right,
where we are starting to talk more
right,
about self and relationships. And it's not such a, I don't know, just a pariah to
right,
discuss how you feel.
absolutely.
And has that changed some for you and your mom now that you've had to have these hard conversations because of this book?
Um, I mean, that's a really open question. Like, I could interpret that as you asking if we're in therapy, but I don't know if that's but maybe I think that's what you're asking. I didn't go
I
to
just feel like
therapy
our generation has a much easier time doing
for
this.
sure,
Mom
absolutely,
does not, like she'll
right.
say, I don't need there, whatever it is. It's different.
Yes, and so like this is a familiar conversation. So my mother is one of those baby boomers who's just like she'll go to the doctor for everything, and part of that is coming from Mississippi. Historically, where's her healthcare in the nation, and she lives in Boston now, so she has quote unquote good healthcare. So she's going for everything, and then I'm always like, Mama, but I mean, this is what I used to say. It was like maybe you should go for some, mental health care. And oh, Key, yeah, because she's in that generation. I, should have gone to therapy while creating this book. I did not. I went to therapy before, I went to therapy after. And what I learned is like, the thing about our generation that are worse sometimes is that we can just use therapy as like the correct all. Like in my experience, and I don't have the experience of a lot of my friends, like bad therapy is bad. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I have had the experience post writing that book of some horrendous therapists who came to me because they read the book, and instead of, like, they were like, I would like to talk to you after reading Heavy, which, I was like, oh cool. And then they start practicing all kind of shit on the book. I was like, okay, the book is different than the person. I mean, the person wrote that book, but I mean, let's talk about like what I didn't put everything I experienced and feel in that book. So I will say, but I also have come up on some really incredible uh, a real incredible therapist in the last year or so. Um, I can't speak for my mama, but I know she's more open to therapy than she ever was. So.
Well, I'm going to go back to your grandmother, because one of the saddest, I think most painful statements that I read is when your grandmother said that she thinks that men just forgot that she was someone's daughter.
Yeah.
And that like really, really got to me. It seems to happen all the time. But why do you think she wanted to make that point specifically to you? And I think it really held, because that was a consistent moral grounding that you had, knowing that men had such power
Right.
over women and could do so much damage.
Yeah, when I was an undergrad, I came to college as a philosophy and political science major. And then like, like a lot of people after first semester, I was I changed. I was like an English, Social, and women's studies. And one of the reasons that I started women's studies my second semester in college was because my grandmama was like always telling me and teaching me this kind of stuff. But I mean, and I had read some bell hooks. My mother had given me some bell hooks and stuff like when I was in high school. Well, actually, she had some bell hooks on the shelf. So I read quote unquote like third wave feminism, sort of. but I didn't sit in it the way I sat in it in college, and just reading like a historization of so much of what I'd seen. And my granny was pretty much one. She was trying to be like, don't fucking be like these men. You know what I mean? Like this notion that like, and I grew up in the '80s where people were like, black boys need black men. It's not like it wasn't even that you need good men or good fathers or like healthy people who have thought and sort of contended with like what the worst of the world encouraged them to do. People were just like, black boys just need to be in the house with some black parents, black fathers, and that was disrespectful because I didn't grow up with a black father. I grew up with my grandmama, my mama, my aunties, like, and I never missed my father. Like, truth be told, and I understand. Like I say in the book, like my mother needed my father or a partner in him much more than I needed a father. You know what I mean? Like I needed, yeah, I think a healthy relationship would have been great for me if my mother was in a healthy relationship. But you know, I didn't have that. So I think my grandmother was just often trying to like warn me, don't be a trifling man. But also she was trying to warn me about like power. You know what I'm saying? Like, um, but I don't want to put words in her mouth, like because what she said was what she said, which is like, they forgot I was somebody's daughter, which says a lot because a lot of times like these same men who I think will go out of their way to destroy women will also be like, hey man, don't mess with so and so. That's so and so's daughter. But like, okay, everybody's a daughter, and you shouldn't need to believe that somebody's a daughter to treat them with like honor, respect, care, and tenderness. But in this world, not just in black communities, I think so too many men do that.
Yeah, it's sad but true. I want to make sure we save some time for the audience to ask some questions. If everybody could camera on for a second, I'd like to get a group photo just so we can post and get more readers reading this book. So if you have the book, let's hold it up. If you don't, just camera on. I think Emily will take our photo. Emily, you let me know when you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm gonna take, oh my gosh, for the first time, we have far more people than we have space on this screen. So I'm gonna take a few. So be patient with me. There's 3 screens I need to screenshot, which is so awesome. Thank y'all so much. So I'm gonna, for the next, let's say the next like 30 seconds, I'm just gonna be taking screenshots, just so y'all know.
You. I feel like it's a panoramic and we have to keep smiling.
Matrix.
Okay, sorry, one more, and then I'll have gotten everyone.
Okay. Keep smiling, everybody.
Okay, I think I got everyone.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move into question and answer. You can obviously drop them in the chat box. You can also raise your hand, but I'm famous for my rapid fire questions. And so I am going to ask those quickly to Kiese while y'all are getting your questions ready. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right. Ben or bend?
Bend with a D. Yeah.
Writing or reading?
Reading.
Memory or imagination?
Oh shit. That's tough, bro. That's memory.
Best sitcom?
Martin.
All right. What is your, and this is some good alliteration you wrote. So what's your best bent, broken, and built word? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Do you have
Um.
the best?
Oh, feckless.
Okay. What's your number one tape of your number one group?
Wow, you're amazing. Um, ooh. Oh, ATL is Outcast.
All right.
I don't know why I paused on that.
All right. What's the best word to use more than 50 times a day?
I forgot that this conversation is tied to my employer.
Oh, well,
But
we'll put an asterisk there and we'll just keep moving. Oh,
but you know what? No, okay. Listen.
Guilty.
I'm a writer, so I think FUQ is
okay.
different than FUCK,
Okay.
and I use FUQ like full like at least 60 times a day, which is different than FUCK. Like so yeah.
All right. We have three more. Best book worth rereading.
Heavy.
Oh, somebody said heavy. Sula.
Best rap lyric.
I mean, today it's gonna be Kendrick Lamar starts this song, "Mother, I sober, I'm sensitive, um, I feel everything, I feel everybody." It doesn't even rhyme. One man standing on, but I'm sensitive, I feel everyone. I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive. Let's say I'm sensitive. That's the line. I'm sensitive.
And then what's your favorite? I know you gave us a great first line in the book. Do you have, is that your favorite first line or is there another
What
line?
if I was like my line's a favorite first line? If it was a favorite first line, I wouldn't say it. But
Go
um, no, you know what? I mean, Ellison's Invisible Man. Like I am an invisible man. Like that's an incredible first line. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to hand it over. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And I'm going to ask some of these questions that are in the chat box because they're fantastic. Here's a craft question from Ethan. You are amazing at scene work and also at making big statements in heavy. Do you have advice for how to structure the two and create flow between them?
I mean, yeah, the biggest advice is you just have to keep working it and working it and working it and working it until the scene and the quote unquote, exposition or the idea like sort of have the relationship that you want. You have to keep working it and working it and working it. But I just would suggest the same thing I suggest to my students is, don't ever lose the minutia. Don't lose like the importance of like the minute detail in the room. I'm writing this new book about my grandmother and her father. And the first day he came back after having left her for all these years, and I didn't really know who he was. I was with her in the bedroom, and she was like, "You got go spend the night with him in that other room," because she was like, "I want you to watch him. I don't want him to steal any of my shit." And yeah, I'm talking about what I see and what I smell, and I'm talking about like conjecture about my relationship, the relationship that the father had with my grandmother, but also I'm focusing on like this wig head that was on the ironing board. So like the importance of like bringing the minutia of the detail out is like it is as important to bring the minutia of like the concrete out as it is about bringing like sort of like the effervescence of like the emotional stuff you want to hit people with. And so but I just think you just got to keep on working them and working them and working them until kind of you get like the taste that you want in a scene. But I love that you talking about scene work. I think scene work is so underrated in memoir writing.
Great answer. I feel like I'm in class and I'm happy about it. All right.
Oh.
Sarah has a question, and Allison also wants to know, how did your pedagogy change after writing this book? Pedagogy.
I mean, I just became less. I became much more aware of boundaries, of my own boundaries. I read about it in heavy. Like I was one of these I mean, I got this job when I was 26. I started teaching in university when I was 20, at Vassar when I was 26. My students were some of my students were 23, some of my students were 22. Um, I have students come. I always say this, but I had my student, and I'm gonna call his name because he's one of my friends now. Matt Williams. I also was assistant basketball coach my first 2 years teaching at Vassar, and Matt was on the basketball team. And Matt came to my he wasn't even in my class. He's like, "Big bro." That's how you know you too close to students. He was like, big bro, can I use your car?" And I was like, what you want to use my car for? And he was like, "Man, I got to go to the airport." And I was like, "No, you can't use my car." Of course I let him use my car. He brought that shit back, all kind of chicken bones and stuff in it, like, and and didn't put gas in it, and like, and instead of like scolding him, I was just like, let me know if you need to use it again next week. So that sort of teacher was the kind of teacher that I thought I wanted as a person, you know. But I think that there's a lot of downsides to being that sort of teacher. There's a lot of downsides to not being able to say no, to having no boundary, having. You know, I didn't want students to be able to ask for anything. You know, this is speaking about psych counseling. Students would come in my office and talk to me about all sorts of things that I just was not prepared or educated enough to think and talk about, when I should have said, you know, I can't talk to you about that, but you might want to go to the counseling office. Instead, I'm sitting there talking for hours about some shit that I don't know how to talk about. So when the book came out, I necessarily realized I had to create a little bit more boundaries, because I'd opened myself up unaware to class, to students, in ways that I just wasn't comfortable with. So, you know, I just became a little bit more respectful of everybody's boundaries,
Yeah.
including my own.
Well, you've answered part of Noah's question, but the last part is, can alumni audit your class?
Definitely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Sounds good.
Got to do the homework though.
Scott, yeah, homework's on the way. All right. Scott wants to know who's someone we should be reading that many of us probably don't know.
I don't know if you know Disha Phil, y'all. I mean, I'm always surprised that the short story in this country isn't a more consumed like sort of genre. But Disha Phil, y'all wrote this book, Secret Lives of Church Ladies, just phenomenal, interconnected short story collection. Robert Jones wrote The Prophets. He's another great friend of mine. I mean, I'm sure a lot of y'all know Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward is another Mississippi writer who's, I just think, just one of the greatest. But I will say there's a new book coming out called Wilderness, um, by Angela Flournoy. And I mean, I read a ton of books, and I think of all the books I've read in the last few months, like that's the one that I'm that's sticking with me the most. It's called Wilderness. It's a novel. Um, but yeah, I read a ton, but that's the one to me that I'm just like, wow, I do not know how you did that. Catherine Lacey just wrote this book. There's like half of it is memoir, and you flip it, and the other half is sort of like a novella. I'm interested in like that form. I haven't read the book yet to know if she pulls that off, but I like, you know, I like people that are trying to do inventive things. Julian Randall, one of my students, Julian Randall, he writes all sorts of stuff, but his essay collection just came out, Julian Randall. So yeah, I could name people for days, but The Wilderness is the one that is like just stuck in my brain. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure people are looking it up right now and putting it into their cart. Shop at Indie. But I will say, I also follow you on social media, and I saw this post, and I know we're not here to talk about it, but you did say reading fiction builds empathy. And I
Mm-hmm.
just was struck by that. And you have been mentioning some fiction in there. You want to talk about that a little bit, and how
I
fiction
mean,
has shaped you?
yeah, I think it's important, especially, you know, as as a man, even though I'm a writer, like a lot of times people, when they suggest books to me, they suggest self help, and I'm interested in helping myself be better as well. But I think sometimes we there's this part of like the readerly like community that believes that like cis men should only be reading like historical fiction or nonfiction, but I really want to encourage people to read literary fiction. And I don't think literary fiction is like gonna make everybody better. But I do think like stepping into character, stepping out of self, stepping into like the body, the imagination, the realm of other fictional beings, and seeing how people are like crafting like multiple worlds at the same time. I don't know if it necessarily creates empathy, but I think it does. Um, then again, some of the biggest assholes in the world are great fiction readers. But I would love to just see a world where, you know, more of us hardened people take a look at what's happening with fiction, because I think fiction also is, you know, can do some hard things, but the best fiction in the world is just unafraid of softness. And Lord knows, and where we are right now in this world, we need a lot more directed, contemplative softness, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know I didn't get to talk about this too much, but um, Barbara did bring this up. How did food influence your memoir? I know that's a pretty broad question there,
That's a
but
great, yeah. I run a program at Mississippi. I'm going there next week, where we get like 30 kids from Mississippi. Like it's called Kathleen Coleman Literary Arts Justice and Food Initiative. And again, like food, growing food, making food, feeding people was one of the reasons that I learned how to love my grandmother's. Also, like she was one of my first teachers. She taught me how to teach through food. Um, and so, like, I just really wanted to write a book, not just about the consequences of gorging or the consequences of starving, but also just about food. And so, I have another book called City Summer, Country Summer. It's a picture book primarily for like fourth and fifth graders. It just came out. And of everything I've ever made, like, I'm just sort of obsessed with like the way the artist Alexis Franklin like rendered the gardens, because that's one of the things I really wanted her to do in that book. And that garden, in that book, you get to see my grandmother's garden like rendered from somebody else's imagination, but you get to see the cucumbers, the okra, the butter beans, like the sunflowers. And so the growing of food, I think, it was just so important for me growing up. And then when I wrote that book, I wanted to talk about the consequences of gorging and the consequences of starving. But beyond that, I just think being so close to someone who created food from the earth is partially why I'm here talking to you today.
and especially why that land was so important to her. It was.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to leave everybody just with this question because you had us pondering it. Do Black Americans really get healthy choices and second chances? And I thought that was such a great thought and question for all of us to consider. Everybody in the chat is just, thank you so much for this. It's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I feel like this is a part one of 10 that I could do. There's so much to discuss in this book. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to everyone's questions. But I just want to say thank you so much for jousting with words, with paragraphs and punctuation, for accepting your strange and bringing our attention to the bruising brutality of our national sea. I thank you for owning your writing, owning your name, and sharing it with all of us. You are just a fantastic writer, and Rice is so just blessed to have you on staff, and so are the students there. And we appreciate your time tonight. And I think you might have some people auditing your class coming up.
I would love that. Can I just also say thank you, two things, for loving um bookmaking. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people think they love books, but they don't love the bookmaking. So I just want to thank you for loving books and making space and time. And also thank you for loving Rice. I'm new to it. I'm trying to understand it and feel it, and being connected to so many people who love it like actively, like actually makes me feel better about the work I have to do there. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Rice alumni here for you. But thank you, everybody. Y'all have been a great audience. And thank you for the Friends of Fondren for help putting this on with Rice alumni. And I hope everybody has a great night. And hopefully we'll get to do this again soon. Bye, everybody. Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you.